It would be wonderful to solve the emptiness, if simply understanding it were enough, but we almost always mistake grasping the problem for having cured it. Tolstoy's book, A Confession, is actually more about the failure of every easy solution than about a solution itself. If you're curious to find out what one of the greatest minds in history discovered about the emptiness you feel at the end of the day, brace yourself for a small disappointment. There is no shortcut. We've boiled his journey down to 6 passages. Here they are. By the way, before we move on, you can read some exclusive content through the link I left in the description. Let's start at the beginning, which is somewhere you've already been 1,000 times without realizing it. There's a moment at the end of an ordinary day when everything went right and yet something still doesn't add up. The door closed behind you, your shoes came off your feet, the phone screen lit up your face in the dark of the room. Nothing went wrong today. Nobody yelled, the bills were paid, the work got delivered. And still there's a muffled weight in the middle of your chest, a nameless space that isn't sadness and isn't exhaustion. And that shows up right at the hour when there should be peace. You know this moment. Almost no one talks about it out loud because it feels like ingratitude, it feels like weakness. But tomorrow it comes back, and the day after tomorrow too. Before you push that sensation away again, sit with it a little longer. It might be the most honest thing that happens in your entire day. Notice how the emptiness always shows up at the same time. Not in the middle of the tough meeting, not in gridlocked traffic, not when your head is packed with tasks. It waits. It's patient. It shows up when the day's struggle ends and you finally stop. And that's when, at the moment that should be the reward, it takes the place of the reward. That alone should tell you something, and almost no one stops to listen. Whatever only appears when everything quiets down cannot have been created by the noise. The day's noise doesn't manufacture this emptiness. It only covers it, like a hand clamped over a mouth that was about to say something. When the hand pulls away, in the silence of night, the mouth tries to speak again. And you, every single night, find a way to cover it back up before the sentence finishes. You've probably tried to give it a name. Everybody does. Because a nameless thing scares us more than a named one. And the names floating around out there, ready to grab off the shelf for free, are nearly all alike. Someone you trust looked at you and said, with the best of intentions, that it was just accumulated stress, that you needed to take a few days off, disappear for a bit. On your nightstand, gathering dust, there might still be that little notebook where for 1 week you jotted down 3 good things every night before giving up. Because gratitude had also turned into one more chore on the list. At some point came the advice to find a new goal, a project big enough to pull you out of bed in the morning. And when none of that stuck, the cleanest explanation of all was left. Maybe it's just a matter of thinking differently, of choosing to see the bright side, and everything would sort itself out on the inside without needing to change anything else. None of those answers is a lie, and it's important to say that without irony, because the easy path here would be to mock them, and they don't deserve mockery. Stress sickens the body in measurable, real ways. Gratitude really does, demonstrably, change the way the brain registers the day. A goal concentrates the energy that was scattered and going nowhere. There's even a type of heaviness that has a clinical name, a cause in the body, and serious treatment, which nobody should refuse out of pride. The problem isn't that these explanations are false, it's something else, and a lot more uncomfortable to face. You've already tried every one of them, one by one. You rested, you took the weekend off, and that weight came back on Sunday afternoon sharper than before, as if the rest had cleared room for it. You gave thanks, and it worked for a few days, until the list turned into an obligation, and the obligation lost its effect. You set the goal, fought for it, hit it, and the silence that came after the achievement was worse than the silence that came before it. Each of those answers brushed the surface of the thing with the tip of a finger, and none of them got anywhere near the bottom. Maybe because the bottom isn't actually a problem to be solved. Maybe the whole question you've been asking yourself, the question "what's wrong with me?" is the wrong question from the very start, and that's why no right answer to it is ever going to come. To understand why it's the wrong question, you have to meet a man who had already solved in concrete life everything those off-the-shelf answers promised to deliver as a cure. In the late 1870s, in Russia, there was a man somewhere around 50 years old who was, by any measure you'd care to apply, a complete success story. His name was Leo Tolstoy. Years earlier, he had written two of the greatest novels ever produced by humankind, War and Peace and Anna Karenina, and he was recognized in his own lifetime, inside his country and far beyond it, as one of the greatest writers who had ever lived. This wasn't future fame, the kind that only arrives after death. It was present glory, solid, felt while he was alive. He had considerable wealth, vast lands, a large country estate at Yasnaya Polyana. He had remarkable physical health, unusual stamina for his age. He had a wife and many children, a house full of people, voices, motion, a large and lively family swirling around him every single day. And he had, above all, what almost no one in the world ever gets even once: an artistic purpose fully realized at the highest level a human being can reach, recognized talent, a body of work completed and admired. If life were really a checklist of items to conquer, the way they sell it to us, he had ticked every single one, without exception, and there was still room left at the bottom of the page. And it was at that point, at the absolute top of everything, with the whole list filled in, that something inside him stopped working. Pay close attention to what stopped, because the detail is the entire point. His health didn't fall apart, the money didn't run out, the marriage didn't collapse, the career was still going strong. What stopped was something else, something quieter, the ability to keep on not seeing one single thing. Tolstoy began to need to hide a piece of rope from himself because he was afraid, alone in a room at night, of what he might do with it. And he stopped going out hunting with his shotgun. He, who had hunted his whole life, because the simple presence of that weapon in his own hand had become too dangerous. These aren't details dramatized to impress you. He wrote them himself, in his own words, in a small and devastating book called A Confession, where he recounts that period without sparing himself. The man who possessed everything they promised you would cure the emptiness was afraid of himself. This knocks down, right in front of you, the obvious explanation. Notice the simple logic of it. If the emptiness were a lack of success, this man, at the peak of success, shouldn't feel it at all. If it were a lack of recognition, he was saturated with it. If it were a lack of money, of family, of purpose, of health, he was shielded on every flank at once. And the emptiness still got in. It didn't get in gently. It got in with a force that the overwhelming majority of people, too busy to stop, never come to know in their lifetime. This wasn't the collapse of someone who had failed and didn't know how to handle defeat. It was the collapse of someone who had won everything and discovered, at the very instant of total victory, that the victory didn't answer the one question that mattered. And that's why he matters to you, who maybe haven't won at everything, who might be in the middle of the road, and who feel, at the end of the day, the same deep emptiness he felt having won absolutely everything. The question that made Tolstoy hide the rope from himself wasn't complicated in form. It fits into just a few words, and it's precisely because it's so short and simple that it never shuts off. In A Confession, he frames it, in essence, like this: Is there in my life any meaning that won't be destroyed by the death that inevitably awaits me? Read it again, slowly, separating the parts. It isn't the question, is there meaning in life, which is vague and you can put it off forever. It's the question, is there a meaning that death can't erase? Because any meaning that death erases doesn't solve anything. It just postpones the bill. If everything you've built with effort, everything you've loved with your whole heart, everything you've achieved over years is going to be zeroed out by your own death, and after that, by the slow death of everyone who would ever remember you, and after that by the forgetting that you even existed, then what, in the end, is the point of any of it while it lasts? That's the whole question. And it isn't depression. Pulling those two things carefully apart is decisive, because confusing one with the other is by far the most common and most elegant way to flee from it without admitting you're fleeing. Depression is a clinical state with measurable signs in the body and mind that calls for serious professional care and that actively distorts your perception of reality. painting everything a color that doesn't match the facts. What Tolstoy describes is almost the opposite of that. Not a distortion, but a sudden excess of clarity. It's seeing, with total sharpness and without the usual protective filter, a fact that every person knows by heart and almost no one faces head-on, even once in their life. That death is certain, that it's coming for you, that it won't set an appointment and won't ask whether the project is finished and won't wait for you to finish raising your kids. Most people know this with their mouths, repeat it in canned phrases, and organize their whole life around never having to feel it on the inside for even a minute. Tolstoy didn't get sick. He simply lost, at a certain moment, the ability to not feel what everyone knows and no one ever lets touch the chest. He became lucid past the point where the collective numbness still works. And here, a word of honesty is in order. Stepping out of literature for a moment. This weight, when it shows up, doesn't always show up gentle. Sometimes it comes on intense. Sometimes it doesn't pass. Sometimes it comes with the urge to simply give up on life. If that's how it is for you, listen to this carefully. This isn't weakness of character, and it isn't something to walk through alone in the dark. Reaching out to a professional or opening up to someone you trust isn't the opposite of what this video is arguing for. It's the first concrete way to do exactly what Tolstoy discovered at the end. To reconnect with another human being instead of sinking by yourself. And if at any point this weight gets heavier than something you should carry without help, you don't have to carry it that way. There's free and confidential support in your own country at Finder Helpline. Come. And here we have to go back to the beginning, to your end of the day, to your nameless emptiness with the phone glowing on your face. Because now it can finally be renamed honestly. What you feel when the day's noise quiets down wasn't tiredness, which a good night's sleep takes care of, and it wasn't a lack of gratitude, which the list didn't fix. That, in all likelihood, is the same question Tolstoy was asking, trying to rise to the surface inside you. And every night, the second it starts to form, you reach for the phone, turn on the TV, fire off some random message, do some small automatic micro-movement that pushes the question back down before it finishes being born. The hole in your chest was never a failure on your part. It's a legitimate question being smothered methodically, every night, possibly for many years now. Tolstoy tried to smother it too, at first. It was what he knew how to do, because it was what he had been taught, the same way you were taught. The real difference is that at a certain point, he couldn't manage it anymore. His life hadn't fallen apart on the outside, and that's the detail almost everyone gets wrong when they imagine this story for the first time. Nearly everyone assumes he must have lost something huge, that some external tragedy knocked him down. It was the opposite. Everything kept working with an almost irritating perfection. The acclaimed books, the admiration only growing, the healthy children gathered around the big table, the land producing, the money coming in, his health solid. No external gear had broken. What broke, and broke for good, was the inner ability to not ask the question while everything kept spinning perfectly well right in front of him. It's a distinction that changes everything. There's one kind of person who can still numb themselves easily, and that person, when the emptiness shows up at night, quickly finds something to cover it and moves on without much trouble, and there's nothing wrong with that. And there's another kind of person who has crossed, without choosing to, an invisible line, after which distraction simply doesn't take anymore. Not because this second person is weaker than the first, for the opposite reason, because they've become incapable of not seeing. Tolstoy describes this state with almost clinical precision. It wasn't that life had stopped working, it was that he had stopped being able to ignore what it kept working for. Everything around him answered the how question very well. How to earn more, how to write better, how to raise the kids. Nothing answered the what for question. And once that second question settles into someone's chest, there's no book, fame, child, fortune, or trip that can make it shut up again. Tolstoy had all those resources at his fingertips. None of them silenced the question. That's the quiet warning his story sends directly to you. This sensation that shows up at the end of your day might be the first sign that your own ability to distract yourself is starting, slowly, to fail. And that, as uncomfortable as it might sound right now, isn't necessarily bad news. Hold on to that sentence. We'll get to the reason, and it changes everything. To show what he started seeing and could no longer unsee, Tolstoy didn't use a logical argument. He used an image, an old allegory of Eastern origin that he retold in his own way inside a confession. And that's the visual anchor for everything that comes after. Picture a man alone in an open field. A wild beast attacks him, and in panic, running to escape the death bearing down on him, he finds a dry well and throws himself into it to save himself from the beast. But at the dark bottom of that well, waiting, there's a dragon with its mouth wide open, ready to devour him the moment he falls. He can't climb up. The beast is waiting up there. He can't go down. The dragon is waiting down there. Then, mid-fall, his hands catch a bush branch growing out of a crack in the well's wall, and he clings on with all his strength, and he hangs there, suspended in the dark, dangling between the two deaths, holding on with both tired hands. While he's hanging there, suspended over his own certain death, he notices a detail that changes everything. 2 mice, one white and one black, have appeared at the crack and are gnawing, without hurry and without ever stopping, at the base of the branch he's holding onto. He sees with absolute clarity that before long, the branch will give, and that the instant it gives, he'll fall straight into the dragon's open mouth. There's no debate about whether it will happen, only about when, and that when is being eaten away right in front of his eyes, no hurry, no pause, tooth after tooth. And then, suspended over death with his arms already aching, the man notices that on the leaves of that bush there are a few drops of honey. He stretches out his tongue with effort and he licks. And while he's licking, for those few seconds the sweetness is on his tongue. He forgets the dragon down below, forgets the beast up above, forgets the sound of the mice, forgets his own aching arms. The taste of the honey takes up for moments the entirety of his attention. That's the whole allegory. Tolstoy says, without softening a single word, that the man hanging over the dragon is each one of us, and that he himself, at the height of worldwide fame, was that man. The beast up above and the dragon down below are death, which waits on every side at once and from which there is no escape route. The branch he's holding is life, your life, which is, at this very second, being spent. The 2 mice, white and black, are day and night, the hours that take turns without stopping and silently consume the time you have left, in the same stubborn way a mouse gnaws wood in the dark. And the honey is the little sweetnesses with which each person keeps their tongue busy, so they don't have to look down. Here's where his story bumps, without warning, into yours. Remember the off-the-shelf answers from the beginning of this video. The well-earned rest, the gratitude journal, the new goal that reorganizes the week, the idea of just thinking differently. Look at them now inside the allegory of the well. They were never false. They were honey. They worked the way honey works in the story, occupying the tongue for a few seconds so the eyes didn't have to drop and see what was happening to the branch. That's why they gave a real relief, and the relief always, without fail, ended. Honey doesn't fix the situation of being hung up inside the well. It only makes you forget, for shorter and shorter moments, that you're hanging. And when the last bit of taste fades from your tongue, the well is still where it was, the same size, with the same dragon. Faced with this situation, Tolstoy coldly observes that there are basically 4 exits people find to keep standing, and he examined each one in himself. The first he calls the exit of ignorance. It's the exit of those who haven't actually noticed the dragon, the mice, and the branch. Not that they deny death in a casual conversation, everyone admits it that way. It's that they genuinely don't feel it as real, they don't let it touch the chest, and so they truly live without the crushing weight of the question. Tolstoy confesses, with a bothersome kind of honesty, that he envied those people and couldn't go back to being one of them, because you can't unsee what you've already seen once. The second he calls the exit of Epicureanism, and it's by far the most common among people like him, and probably like you. It's the exit of those who have understood the situation, can't pretend they don't anymore, and so decide to enjoy the available honey to the fullest while the branch still holds. A whole life reorganized around more comfort, more pleasure, more distraction, more acquiring, more photographable experiences, all to keep attention stuck on the taste and away from the fall. The third he calls the exit of strength, and it's the lucid and terrible decision to let go of the branch on purpose, to end your own life because you've concluded coldly that it can't be sustained with meaning. The fourth he calls the exit of weakness, and it was his at that moment, and maybe it's the most honest of all. It's to keep on hanging there, seeing everything with total clarity, with no illusion left, but without the courage either to let go of the branch or to pretend again that it'll hold forever. It's just dragging yourself along, clinging on, without illusion and without solution, waiting. Notice something that rearranges everything you use to think about the people around you, and maybe about yourself. Almost everyone you know, and quite possibly you too, is living in the first or second exit and sincerely thinking they're doing fine. The busy, productive person, with a packed calendar, organized hobbies, always with their tongue on some new and more sophisticated drop of honey, isn't, as they believe, above the problem. They're living Epicureanism without ever having heard the name, with the dangerous advantage that no one around them will ever call them sick, because on the outside, they look like the exact portrait of a successful life. And here, at last, is the first layer of what the title of this video promised. The not what you think. The real sign of existential illness isn't visible sadness, the tear, the obvious collapse. It's entirely possible that the most deeply numbed person of all is precisely the busiest, the most praised, the one who never has a single empty minute on the calendar. Because an empty minute is, by definition, a minute when the tongue leaves the honey and the eyes drop, unbidden, to the branch. The emptiness you feel at the end of the day might not be, contrary to everything you've been told, the sign that something is wrong with you. It might be the rare sign that you, among so many, have stopped being able to not see. Getting to this point in the descent, the most natural reaction of a person who thinks a lot is to try to solve this the only way they know, by thinking even more. If there's a hard question, the reasoning goes, then there must be an answer smart enough to close it, and you just need to read more, analyze deeper, and the exit will appear the way the solution to a logic puzzle does. Tolstoy went down that road, with one of the most powerful minds of his era at his disposal, and what he found will save years of your life if you understand it early. He turned first to science, which answered, with admirable precision, every question about the how of the world, how bodies move, how life organizes itself in cells. About the one question that, at that moment, was destroying Tolstoy from the inside. Why do I exist if I'm inevitably going to die? Science had nothing to say, and was honest enough not to pretend it did. He then turned to rational philosophy, to the great thinkers, and found brilliant minds circling for centuries around the same question without ever being able to close it, offering more and more sophisticated formulations of the problem itself, but no answer a person could actually live by when they woke up in the morning. And here comes the most uncomfortable part of all for the audience that prides itself on thinking well. The more Tolstoy thought about the problem, the deeper the well got. Intelligence didn't plug the hole. Intelligence dug the hole. Every new line of reasoning brought the image of the dragon down below into sharper focus, without adding a single real step out. This has a direct and uncomfortable application to your life. Today, tonight. Ruminating alone in the dark, dissecting your own unhappiness with an ever sharper vocabulary, reading one more book on the subject, hoping that this one will finally fix it. None of that is the way out of the well. It's the act of going deeper, just better equipped, with a better flashlight to see the dragon coming. The way out, when it finally came for Tolstoy, didn't come from thinking better or reading more. It came from a direction he wasn't looking in. And the fact that it didn't come from the intellect is what wounds the pride most of anyone who has built their whole identity on being the smart person in the room. Hold on to that too. We'll come back to that point when the first light starts to come in, and it will come in, not much longer now. Before that though, Tolstoy does the hardest thing of the entire path. And this is where a lot of people tune out, because they recognize themselves too well, and the recognition hurts. He takes everything he's discovered about the well, the honey, and the false exits, and points it at a single character, an absolutely ordinary man. The character is named Ivan Ilyich, and he's in a short and merciless novel by Tolstoy called The Death of Ivan Ilyich, and he is, with an almost cruelly exact precision, the average professional of any era, including, point for point, yours. Ivan Ilyich did everything right, in the correct order. A respectable career in the civil service, climbing the rungs in the expected sequence, the right post, the right salary, the right social position, a convenient marriage, the kind you make not out of passion, but because it's what you do at the age when you do it. The right house in the right neighborhood, the right people around him. He carefully avoided every unnecessary friction, every uncomfortable intensity, every detour that could cost him. He built, piece by piece, with widespread approval, an absolutely correct and respectable life. And then, without warning, he gets sick with a disease that has no cure, and he's forced, against his will, to stop, to lie down, alone, motionless, with the one thing he had spent his whole life fleeing without ever admitting it. Empty, long, silent time to finally look at the branch. Lying there, dying slowly, with no way left to distract himself, with no sweetness within reach of his tongue, Ivan Ilyich is run through by a question Tolstoy frames in a way that never leaves the head of anyone who's read it even once. What if everything I did was wrong? Not wrong in the sense of sin, of crime, of scandal. He didn't steal, didn't kill, didn't do anything society would condemn. Wrong in the most terrible sense that word can carry. What if his whole life, so correct on the outside, so respectable in the eyes of absolutely everyone, was a life that he, on the inside, never actually got around to living? What if he had executed, with exemplary competence, all the right moves, in the right order, without ever having been truly present, alive, awake, inside a single one of them? What if all that respectability was just the perfect packaging of a complete absence? That's the peak of the discomfort of this path, and it needs to be said without any quick relief right after, because any quick relief offered now would itself be just one more drop of honey served at the right moment. The terror in Ivan Ilyich was never about dying. It was about discovering, too late to fix anything, lying there with no strength left, that he had never actually gotten around to living. Let that silence really land before going on, without filling it with anything, because it's inside that silence, and not in the words around it, that the question finally finds you. And what Tolstoy does with that silence, instead of easing it, is turn it, on purpose, against the most carefully protected thing of all, your idea of a decent life. The immediate temptation, on hearing the story of Ivan Ilyich, is to defend yourself by saying he was a shallow man, that you aren't like that your life has more content than his. And maybe it does, in part. But Tolstoy isn't talking about the obvious shallowness, the kind you can see from a distance and judge easily. He's talking about the inherited script that almost everyone, including those who think of themselves as deep, follows to the letter, sincerely believing they chose it freely. The script says, in a low and steady voice, climb the career ladder, because climbing is the right thing to do. Project stability, because projecting is what's expected of a serious adult. Do what's expected of someone in your position and at your age, because that's how respectability is preserved. Don't stray too far off the rails. Don't ask too loudly, because straying is expensive, and reputation, once cracked, can't be put back together. Tolstoy saw, in that script followed competently and applauded on every side, a quiet form of death in life, with the perverse twist of being a death disguised as virtue. The person isn't just asleep without knowing it. They're being actively rewarded and held up as an example for being so soundly asleep, because being asleep, performed with elegance, is externally identical to a life well led. And the question he asks, passed on to you with no accusation in his voice, cuts straight to the bone. How much of your life today is actually your choice? decided from the inside, and how much is autopilot with a good reputation, decided from the outside and merely obeyed? There's no right answer you need to say out loud to anyone. There's only the uncomfortable honesty of letting the question touch your chest for a few seconds before pushing it back down the automatic way you push down all the others. Because this is where the easy path from the start of this video finally reveals itself for what it always was. Those off-the-shelf answers from the beginning, rest more, give thanks more, set a new goal, change your mindset, all operated comfortably inside the inherited script. None of them ever asked you to question the script itself. They only asked you to execute it with a little less friction. None of them was the question about why, after all, that specific machine, and not another, and not none at all. The obvious path was never an innocent mistake. It was the most carefully built trap there is, precisely because it's the only one in which all of society, in chorus, gives you a standing ovation for staying inside it without complaining. Having honestly gone all the way down to this bottom, with no shortcut and no sweetness along the way, it's fair to ask now how, in the end, Tolstoy got out. Because he did get out for real. And the way he got out is the heart of everything that's still left to say. The answer didn't come from the novels he himself had written, nor from the philosophers he'd read, nor from the cultured people of his own circle, who were in the same well he was, just with more sophisticated honey. It came, and this humbled him deeply, from the one place a man in his position would never have thought to consult. Tolstoy began to observe, now with real attention, and not with the condescension of before, the poor and illiterate peasants who worked the lands around his estate. And he noticed something that scrambled everything he thought he knew. Those people, who had incomparably less than he did in everything he had always valued, didn't carry the despair that was destroying him from the inside. They worked with their bodies. They had faith, some solid form of belief that gave them firm ground under their feet. They truly belonged to a community that held them up, and they faced their own death, when it finally came, with a simple, whole serenity that he, with all his enormous library and all his worldwide fame, was incapable of reaching. The conclusion Tolstoy came to, watching this, is brutal, because it flips everything that came before on its head. The emptiness he was feeling, and that you may be feeling at this very moment, wasn't the universal truth about the whole human condition. It was a fairly specific sickness of a fairly specific class. People privileged enough to have been disconnected, over generations, from real work done with the body, from the community that holds you up, from finitude faced head-on without a filter. His despair wasn't coming from having finally seen the naked truth of life. It was coming from having lost, along the road of privilege, what kept ordinary people whole, and standing in the face of that same truth they also knew. The way out was down below, in what his whole class had learned, over generations, to dismiss as simple, crude, primitive. That's the first real light on this entire path. And it's from here that the tone starts to shift, because for the first time, there's a concrete direction to walk in. The emptiness stopped being a dark, dead-end alley and became a symptom with a cause you can name: disconnection. And what has a cause you can name can, at least in part, be reversed through action. Tolstoy's next step can be misunderstood in a way that would, in an instant, destroy everything that's been built up to here. He found a decisive part of the answer in what he called faith. And it's far too easy, on hearing that one word, to slam the door shut right there, concluding that the destination of this whole hard descent was just, in the end, follow a religion and stop thinking. That isn't it. And it isn't it because of a concrete historical fact. Tolstoy entered into open and harsh conflict with the Russian Orthodox Church of his time, savagely criticized its institutions, and ended up, in 1901, formally excommunicated by it. He wasn't by any means preaching obedient submission to an institutional dogma. What he called faith was something else, and that something else works. And this is the crucial point, even for those who can't believe in anything supernatural. It was practical faith, the decision, made with the body and not just with the head, to live as if life had meaning, and the discovery, made by living that way and not before, that meaning was born from the way of living itself, and not from a proof that had to come, impossibly and pointlessly, before any movement. For the skeptic, it boils down to this. The question about death and meaning doesn't have, and won't have, an answer that can be demonstrated like a theorem on paper. Waiting for that impossible demonstration before allowing yourself to actually live is the decision to stay hanging from the branch forever, demanding it provide a written guarantee that, by its very nature, it can never give to anyone. Tolstoy's practical faith was, at bottom, the conscious decision to drop the demand for prior proof and to give himself, with his full weight, to something bigger than the self, discovering in the process that meaning was never an answer received, ready-made from outside, but a consequence produced day after day by living a certain way and not another. And what is that way of living? This is where the long, hard descent turns into construction, and Tolstoy's central thesis can be said with no more beating around the bush. Suffering, he concludes, after all of it, comes from a whole life organized, from center to edges, around the self. My pleasure, my comfort, my status, my recognition, my glory, my safety, my project. The whole complex machinery of the self pointed, unceasingly, inward to feed, protect, and inflate its own center. And this is the discovery that rearranges, retroactively, everything that came before in this video. The more life turns toward the self, the deeper, not shallower, the well gets. The emptiness you feel at the end of the day isn't the lack of one more thing that hasn't been added, bought, or attached to the self yet. It's the direct, predictable result of the self being the only final recipient of absolutely everything. A center that only receives, receives, and receives, and never actually turns outward, goes deeper without any possible bottom, because there's no amount of acquiring in the world that can fill a structure whose very shape is that of a whole turned in on itself. You aren't hungry for more, you're the wrong shape. Tolstoy drew that contrast inside Anna Karenina. The novel, which a lot of people think is just a story of forbidden love, actually has two trajectories running alongside each other the whole time, silently commenting on one another. One is Anna's, who organizes her entire existence around her own desire and her own passion, and, page after page, closes inward on herself in a spiral that tightens and ends, inevitably, in destruction. The other, which a lot of people forget because it's less dazzling, is Levin's, who spends the whole book wrestling with the same question from A Confession, the what for of all this in the face of certain death, and finds something very close to peace, not through any brilliant intellectual answer, but by working the land alongside the peasants, getting married, taking on the real weight of responsibility for other people, slowly shifting the center of gravity of his own life from inside the self to what's outside it. The two ask the same question about life. One answers it by accumulating inward and destroys herself in the end. The other by turning outward, and he stays standing. But an idea, however precise, is still just one more drop of honey if it stays stuck in the head, shining in there without ever coming down into the hands. Tolstoy knew that better than anyone, and that's why the most important part of what he offers isn't a thesis to agree with, it's a scene to feel. It's in a short and cutting story called Master and Man. A landowner driven by greed, obsessed with closing a deal before someone else closes it first, sets out on a trip in the dead of Russian winter, taking one of his servants with him. He ignores every warning sign in the sky and the wind, because profit weighs more in his head than caution. The two of them get lost in the middle of a heavy snowstorm, in total darkness, going in circles. And it becomes clear, at some point with no going back, that they're going to freeze to death there, together, in the middle of the white nothingness. And then the landowner, this man who spent his whole life calculating every gesture exclusively in his own favor, does, with no plan, and almost without understanding his own motion, the one thing he had never done. He lies down on top of the servant's almost motionless body and covers him entirely with his own body, with the warmth he still has left, to keep him alive. The servant, covered, survives until dawn. The landowner, exposed, dies during the night. And Tolstoy describes this death not as defeat, not as the sad end of a greedy man, but as the first and only time he was, at last, whole, present, and at peace with himself. The meaning he chased his whole life in deals and gains wasn't in any idea, in any achievement. It was in a single concrete physical act of living in the last instant, for another instead of for himself. That's the point where the reflection of this video stops being analysis of a problem and starts being a path to walk. And notice, the serenity the whole ending is going to deliver to you is already announced here. In this man who finds, late but he finds it, peace at the very instant when he stops, for the first time, living for himself. The practical path that follows from this Tolstoy didn't just write down in books. He lived it with his own body in his final decades. And that matters, because it's what protects everything being said here from the easy accusation of being just pretty theory from someone who never tested it. In a direct book called What Then Must We Do, and especially in the way he conducted his own existence after the crisis, he refused the aristocratic idleness he had every right to by birth. He started ploughing the land with his own hands, alongside the peasants. He learned, already old and world famous, to make boots, sitting on a bench like any craftsman. Not as a pose, but because he had discovered in practice something simple anyone can test. Real work, done with the body to the point of exhaustion, actually silenced the abstract anguish that no line of reasoning had ever managed to silence. And here's a direct application for you, maybe the most immediate of them all. A considerable, almost never noticed part of modern emptiness comes from a life lived almost entirely in the abstract. The day goes by in screens, messages, meetings, spreadsheets, and almost nothing at the end of the day ends in a concrete, touchable object that exists in the world because you produced it with your body. The mind that operates only in the abstract spins in the void because there's nothing physical anchoring it to the ground. You don't, rest easy, have to become a farmer or quit everything. But there's an honest experiment to try tonight, before sleep. End this day having made, from start to finish, one real thing with your hands, the kind that produces a physical result you can then look at and touch. Cook the whole meal for real. Fix the thing that's been broken for months, waiting. Plant something in the dirt. Not for the task itself, which is small, but for the specific, recognizable silence that finished concrete work settles into the head, and that you'll recognize in your body the second it arrives. Alongside that, Tolstoy puts another piece of the path, almost always misread as sacrifice when it's actually the opposite of that. He renounced, by his own choice, a great deal of the luxury and material excess he had full access to, and it's crucial to understand what he wasn't saying. He wasn't preaching destitution, and he wasn't romanticizing poverty as a virtue in itself. What he saw was something more subtle. Most of a modern person's needs are not, when you look closely and honestly, real needs. They're invented needs, installed from the outside in over years of repetition, and each one functions like a chain locked to your ankle. The more things you feel you need to have in order to feel okay, the less free you are on the inside, no matter how much you have in the bank. Simplicity, for Tolstoy, was never deprivation. It was liberation in the most literal sense. Every desire less is one less chain locking up your own movement. For anyone genuinely tired of the shallowness, of the consumption that never ends, of the treadmill of wanting that never slows down, here's an experiment you can apply. Honestly identify a single real excess in your own life, something you've convinced yourself you need that actually just eats up your time, your money, and your attention without giving back almost anything, and cut it out on purpose for a defined period, observing during that time not what's missing, but how much unexpected lightness fills the empty space it left behind. And here Tolstoy firmly closes a dangerous door, and that gesture is what keeps any of this from degenerating into one more empty self-help speech. The door is the one to the heroic shortcut, the seductive fantasy that there's a single, grand gesture, an epic and photographable version of finding the meaning of life. He answers that fantasy through a character in a story called Father Sergius. It's the story of a man who, in a noble and admired gesture, abandons the worldly, glittering life to become a saint, who seeks enlightenment by the loftiest and most visible path of all, and who discovers, after many years of effort, that he carried with him, into the very sainthood he had achieved, the same pride he thought he was running from. The spectacular search for meaning was, the whole time, just the same old ego from before, now dressed in more sophisticated religious clothes. Peace, when it finally arrives for this man, doesn't arrive at the height of spiritual grandeur in front of an admiring crowd. It arrives much later, in an obscure, humble, anonymous life, of common small service to ordinary people, with no one watching, with no glory attached to the gesture. Whoever seeks meaning in order to become, through it, admirable in other people's eyes, has only swapped honey and is still on the same branch as before. The real path is small, quiet, slow, and almost always entirely invisible to any outside observer. And then there's the concrete, historical, verifiable fact that gives all of this a weight no theory would have on its own, because Tolstoy paid for what he preached with his own life. On an icy winter morning, 82 years old by then, sick, frail, he got up quietly in the dark, without waking the household, and left behind his own house at Yasnaya Polyana, the wealth accumulated over an entire lifetime, his family asleep, and set off, an old sick man in the darkness, on some train or other, to live, in whatever time he had left, exactly what he believed in, with not one more inch of distance between the words spoken and the deed done. He didn't get far. His old body couldn't take the journey and the cold. He got seriously sick on the way and died a few days after falling ill, lying in a borrowed bed, in a small room in an obscure train station called Astapovo, far from everything and everyone he knew. We have to resist the temptation to turn this into a tidy, uplifting lesson, because it isn't one, and pretending it is would be a betrayal of the man. It was the price of a coherence taken to its very limit, the point at which a human being refuses, whatever it costs, to keep on living any differently from what he has recognized as true, even if that refusal costs him, as it did, his own life. There's no hidden demand here that you do the same, abandon anything, set off for nowhere. There's only the weight, which deserves silence, of seeing, with no beautifying retouches, what it actually costs, at the limit, to truly live what you say you believe in. Stripping away now all the ornament, all the literature, all the history, what this man would say, directly and simply, to you, today, at the end of your day, with the phone still glowing on your face in the dark, and the emptiness still parked there, in the middle of your chest, would probably be, at bottom, something like this. Stop trying to make the emptiness shut up with sweetness, whatever your favorite drop happens to be, because it has never cured anyone of anything, and you've known that from your own experience for years now. Don't dodge the question about death as if dodging it were a sign of maturity. Dodging is just better dressed flight, and facing the question head on, contrary to what fear promises, brings more relief than running from it for one more night. Take the self out of the absolute center of your life, not out of moral duty and not out of guilt, but because it is, mechanically, the only thing that demonstrably empties the well instead of digging it deeper. Make tonight, before you sleep, one real thing with your own hands from start to finish, and pay attention to the specific silence that settles into your head. Cut, this week, one excess, just one, and then measure the lightness that remains, not the absence that aches. And reconnect for real with at least one concrete person of flesh, voice, and presence, with your full attention and not with the tired leftovers after the screens, because it was exactly that, real connection with other human beings, that kept whole and standing the simple people Tolstoy at the bottom of the well so envied. None of this is magic. None of this is fast. None of this fixes tonight. It's a hard path and, at the same time, an entirely possible one, because the promise of easiness would itself be just one more drop of honey served at the exact moment you most want to believe it. And now, at the end of everything, there's one last thing, the only one that makes sense after everything you've just walked through, and it changes, retroactively, the entire meaning of everything that came before. Throughout this whole long path, The emptiness has been treated as the enemy, the dark thing to be understood so it could finally be defeated and driven out. But look at it now one last time, calmly, with everything you know in this moment and didn't know at the beginning. That emptiness at the end of the day, that sensation that had no name and felt like ingratitude, it was never your enemy. It was, the whole time, the concrete proof that there's still something inside you alive enough, awake enough, to ask the question, what for? Most people go through their whole lives and never get to feel this for real, with its full weight, because the numbness in them never failed even for a day. They licked the available honey down to the last instant and never had to look down. You looked. And the fact that you felt the emptiness and that you've stayed all the way here instead of running away one more time doesn't mean something inside you broke or is defective. It means, on the contrary, that something inside you refused, even without you consciously deciding it, to spend your whole life sleeping with your eyes open. That isn't, and never was, a curse that fell on you. It's a chance that opened up, and it's a chance very few people get, and even fewer realize they got. So no, you don't have to fill the emptiness today. You don't have to solve the question of death tonight, alone, in the dark. You don't have to overhaul your entire life before you close your eyes. You only have to, for now, stop running from it and take, tomorrow or the day after, one small real step in the direction of someone who's near you. The rest comes later, slowly, in whatever time it needs to come, and there's no rush at all in that. For now, tonight, it's more than enough to know, and to sleep knowing, that the emptiness in your chest was never the sign that your life went wrong somewhere along the way. It was, the whole time, just the stubborn sign that it's still, despite everything, despite you, waiting, patiently, to finally begin. You can rest with that tonight. For today, that's plenty. If this path made any real sense to you, leave a like, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next videos, and consider joining the Members Club, where we have exclusive content. And if this weight we talked about here ever gets heavier than something you should carry alone, you don't have to carry it that way. There's free and confidential support in your own country at Finder Helpline. Kamera. Until next time.